criminal court case that I chose, I did Justin Ross Harris versus the state of Georgia. To give you just a little bit of a background on this case, Mr. Harris is accused of and on trial for 8 counts, the most severe one being the murder of his child, Cooper Harris, by leaving him in a hot car. But the counts range from this murder to just like a child neglect charge to he was sexting with minors, so it's like child exploitation. So those are the counts that he is on trial for. And so now I'm going to start my closing argument. Okay. As a jury, your duty is to determine if Mr. Harris is guilty on all counts, including the murder of his child, Cooper Harris. We're going to start out by reviewing some of the major points of evidence during this trial, and then we're going to talk about what that means, especially in relation to the defendants and the defense team's argument. And then we're just going to kind of like close it out and tell you what the burden of proof is, and what beyond a reasonable doubt actually means, and how you'll use that definition to make your guilty or not guilty verdict. So we're going to start out with some of the evidence. So Harris was obviously very not happy in his life. He was searching for ways like how to get a divorce and what like separation versus divorce means and what the steps are that you have to do to take that and put that into action. He was paying for prostitutes and lying to his wife about where he was. So you can definitely tell that Mr. Harris was not happy with his life. On top of this is where the sexting with minors comes into play. And there is one girl in particular that he knew was 15 and was sending and receiving nudes back and forth, and he was aware of the age. There was also another minor that asked him, and this is important when we discuss the evidence later to come, asked him specifically, knowing that he is married and that he has a life and all of that kind of thing, does he ever feel guilty? Does his conscience ever come into play, is what she said exactly. And he told her no, that his conscience never comes into play, that it's like 2 different lives for him. So he's like living like a double life. That's his words. But in regards to the actual murder and what that has to do with it, Mr. Harris was supposed to drop his younger son off, Cooper Harris, at the daycare before he went to work, and he would do this every day. And then the wife would come pick him up. So things started to change a little bit between their Memorial Day beach trip and then June when this occurred. And when the daycare workers were interviewed, and even like during trial, they said that Ross Harris, or Justin Ross Harris, would take a picture of Cooper every day when he dropped him off at the daycare. But then all of a sudden, like weeks leading up to Cooper's death, he never took a picture of him. He never, like, it wasn't the same. He didn't have the same relationship with him. So that is definitely evidence against that. And then when he would talk to this woman named Jane Meadows, which was not his wife, but he professed love for her. He said, and I quote, "I hate being married with kids." And then at a separate occasion, another quote, "If it wasn't for Cooper, I would leave my wife." So he's saying that if it wasn't for his child, he would leave his wife. He would end the marriage. So this all kind of goes to prove that Mr. Harris, after whatever happened on Memorial Day at that beach trip, was not happy. He wanted to get out, and it wasn't just an unhappiness. It was he was going to do something about it. So moving forward into the evidence during the trial, even the defense's witness, Dr. Brewer, that they called to the stand, he admitted after we gave him all of the facts that it is not a case of a failed memory system. So that means that Mr. Harris did not just forget about his child, that this had to have been, he had to have known that Cooper was in the car. He had to have seen him. There he mentioned like 3 or 4 points of when he should have saw the child. So those would be when they got Chick-fil-A that morning, the morning of, he stopped and took Cooper to breakfast at Chick-fil-A, got him a drink and a breakfast, and then he is in traffic with Cooper, making turns, like driving to work, and then he backs into the parking spot at his work's like parking lot. So he physically has to turn his body to back up, and Cooper, from if the driver's seat is here and over here would be where Cooper is. He's not directly behind the driver's seat, he's behind the passenger seat. So when you turn to back up, he is right here. So he should have seen him then. Then, after all of that, even if he failed to see him through all of that, Ross Harris comes out at lunchtime to his car. So even if he failed to see Cooper and all of that, he came out again halfway through the day at lunchtime and still claims to have not seen Cooper when Cooper was clearly visible from the outside of the car, and he came out to his car. He goes back into work, and then he comes out at the end of the day, and the video evidence shows that it only took Ross Harris 3 seconds to get in his car, close the door, and take off. And then he drives 0.6 miles, stops his car in another parking lot, like pulls into a parking lot, stops his car, and gets out and causes a big scene about his child, calls 911, the whole like ordeal. And even after that, he still tells his wife that he was scared about like what he would look like. And then he said, "I would not bring him back if I could." So Ross Harris told his wife that he would not bring back his son Cooper Harris even if he could. So that just like kind of shows you the kind of evil that we're dealing with. Like, he had no regard for anybody but himself. And his brother even testified and said that a lot of the times, like, it's the people who you really don't think in your life can be capable of that evil and hurt people, but it turns out to be them. It turns out to be the people that you didn't think that it would be, and his own brother did testify that in court. So the defense is going to try to say that it's an accident, he didn't mean to, and that prior to this he didn't hate Cooper, he didn't have malice for Cooper, like any of that. But I just want to explain to you that no matter what, accident is off the table, because he has met the threshold for criminal neglect of a child, regardless of if it was on purpose or not. Counts 3 and 4 of criminal neglect of a minor have been met because he did leave Cooper Harris in the car, and Ross Harris, that was his responsibility. You can't just leave your kid in a car. That is neglect. You failed to do something, which is the definition of neglect. He failed to take care of his child, and because of that, something bad happened to his child. His child was harmed, in this case, murdered. So accident is already off the table. So he is at least guilty of criminal neglect beyond a reasonable doubt. But the part that pushes it past that criminal neglect for me, that really pushes it to it being him murdering his son Cooper Harris, is that he looked up and researched a lot of information, videos, articles, and so forth of hot car deaths and how hot a car gets if it's left in the sun. What about if the windows are cracked? Like, all of these scenarios. But he looked up one video in particular, how hot does it get in a parked car? And that video talked about how horrible it would be to die in a parked car, how long it takes for a living being to die in a hot car, and just kind of like the variations of, even if it's windy outside, like, it still doesn't take long. If the windows are cracked, it still doesn't take long to kill an individual in a hot car. So I just want to let you as a jury be reminded of these pieces of evidence, and that they point directly to Ross Harris being guilty, and beyond a reasonable doubt. That means for a normal, rational person, that if you were to look at all of these, like all of this evidence, all these points, you would say, oh, Mr. Harris, like, yes, he is guilty of killing his son. It is not like, it's not by any like imagined situation, like in point one, like, you know what I mean? It's not any type of crazy, maybe this would have happened in like another dimension. It's nothing like that. It is in a reasonable person's mind, could Mr. Harris have killed Cooper Harrison in this case? I do believe the answer is yes, and I believe that when y'all get back to the jury room that you'll be able to come to that conclusion as well by looking at the evidence. And thank you very much.